Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Weight of Grief. Calvin Rasmussen stood at the edge of his wife's grave, watching the polished mahogany casket descend into the earth. Rain mixed with the tears on his face, and he couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. 43 years old, and he felt ancient. Christy had been his world for 12 years. His high school sweetheart found again at a conference in Boston, his second chance at love after a bitter divorce in his 20s. The funeral director's hand on his shoulder pulled him from his thoughts. "Mr. Rasmussen, whenever you're ready." Calvin nodded, though he'd never be ready. The gathered crowd, maybe 50 people, stood with umbrellas and sympathetic faces. He recognized most of them, colleagues from his architectural firm, neighbors from their gated community in suburban Connecticut, Christie's book club friends. But some faces were unfamiliar, and he caught himself wondering who they were. Had Christie had a life he didn't fully know? The thought felt disloyal. She died of a sudden heart attack while jogging. 38 years old and gone in an instant. The doctor said it was a congenital defect nobody knew existed, a ticking time bomb on her chest that finally detonated on a Tuesday morning in May. "I'm so sorry for your loss," said a woman with dark hair and expensive jewelry. Stacy Kane, one of Christie's closest friends from her yoga studio. She'd been at the house almost every day since the funeral, helping organize things, bringing food. Christie was such a light. "If you need anything." "Thanks, Stacy," Calvin interrupted gently. He'd heard variations of this sentiment 100 times in the past week. People meant well, but their words felt like sandpaper against raw skin. As the crowd dispersed, Calvin's best friend Clayton Vargas appeared beside him. They'd known each other since college, survived startup failures and successes together. Clayton ran a tech security firm, and his analytical mind had been Calvin's anchor through this nightmare. "You staying at the house tonight?" Clayton asked. "Sarah and I can come over." "You shouldn't be alone." "I need to be alone," Calvin said. "I need to, I don't know, go through things. Start dealing with reality." Clayton studied him with concern. "Call me if you need anything." "I mean it, Cal." 3 in the morning, doesn't matter. Calvin drove home through streets that felt unfamiliar despite traveling them daily for 8 years. The house, a sprawling colonial he'd designed himself, looked cold and empty. Christie's car still sat in the driveway. Her gardening gloves were still on the porch railing. Her coffee mug was probably still in the sink from that last morning. He couldn't go inside. Not yet. Instead, Calvin walked around the property, letting rain soak through his funeral suit. They'd built a good life here. His architectural firm specialized in sustainable residential design and had made him wealthy enough to be comfortable but not ostentatious. Christie had worked from home as a consultant for nonprofit organizations, or so she'd said. Her office was always locked when she worked, claiming she handled sensitive donor information. The locked office. He'd never questioned it. Why would he? Marriage was built on trust. Christie had her space, he had his studio. They had their shared spaces. It worked. But now she was gone, and someone had to go through her files, her papers, her digital life. The estate attorney had said as much. Calvin was the executor. It was his responsibility. The next morning, Calvin stood outside Christie's office door. It was the only room in the house he'd never entered. She'd insisted on installing a deadbolt when they moved in, saying she needed absolute privacy for client confidentiality. He'd found it odd, but let it go. Now, with the key from her personal effects, Calvin felt like an intruder in his own home. The key turned smoothly. The door swung open. The room was almost empty. No file cabinets. No bookshelves. No photographs or plants or personal touches. Just bare walls painted a clinical white, heavy blackout curtains, and a single desk in the center with a laptop computer. Calvin's stomach tightened. This wasn't an office. This was a cell. A secret chamber. He approached the laptop like it might explode. It was expensive, newer than his own work computer. He opened it, and it sprang to life without requiring a password. She'd disabled security entirely. The screen showed a desktop background of a tropical beach. Not a photo of them together. Not anything personal. Just a beach. And a single folder labeled insurance. Calvin's hand trembled as he clicked it open. Chapter 2. The The Truth in Pixels. Inside the folder were subfolders. Dozens of them, each labeled with a man's name. Marshall J., Richard C., Patrick L., Gary W., Calvin R. His own name stared back at him from the screen. Calvin clicked on it, his heart hammering. The folder contained video files, audio recordings, photographs, and documents. He clicked the first video. The footage showed their actual bedroom, from an angle near the ceiling corner. Timestamp, 3 months ago. In the video, Christy was in bed with a man Calvin didn't recognize. The man was younger, muscular, with slicked-back dark hair. They were laughing, intimate, comfortable. Then Christy looked directly at the camera. Calvin could see it now. She knew it was there, and smiled. It wasn't her smile for him. It was something predatory. Calvin closed the video before he could see more. His hand shook so badly he knocked over a pen cup on the desk. He opened another file. Audio recording. Christy's voice, crystal clear. Marshall, he's finally starting to show symptoms. The doctor visit next week should confirm the liver damage. I've been patient, but we need to accelerate. I'm not waiting another year. A man's voice responded. Marshall, presumably. Baby, you're playing with fire. If anyone tests for heavy metals, they won't. He trusts me completely. He's so pathetically devoted that I could probably poison him in front of his face, and he'd thank me. They both laughed. Calvin stood up so fast the chair toppled backward. He made it to the bathroom before vomiting violently. When he could breathe again, he stared at his reflection. His skin had a grayish tint. He'd been feeling exhausted for months. Christy had been so concerned, scheduling doctor appointments, making him special health shakes every morning. The shakes she insisted he drink alone, in his studio, while he worked. Oh my God, he whispered to his reflection. She was killing me. He returned to the laptop with new purpose, ignoring the nausea roiling in his gut. He opened more files methodically, building a picture of systematic evil. The other folders revealed Christie's full operation. She'd been running an elaborate blackmail and extortion scheme. Each man had videos of themselves in compromising situations, affairs, drug use, illegal business dealings. Some seemed to know they were being recorded. Others clearly didn't. Marshall Jones appeared in several folders. He was Christie's partner. Photos showed them together in hotels, restaurants, vacation spots Calvin had never visited. Messages between them detail their schemes. Richard's company pension fund looks vulnerable. If we can make him think embezzlement is the only way to pay us, we control him completely. Patrick is cheating on his wife with his secretary. Got perfect footage. He'll pay $50,000 to keep it quiet. Gary's medical practice has prescribing irregularities. We leverage that. We own him for life. Calvin's folder was the most extensive. It included documentation of Christie's systematic poisoning plan spanning 18 months, videos from hidden cameras throughout their house, bedroom, bathroom, his studio, copies of their joint bank accounts and investment portfolios, a forged will leaving everything to Christie. Life insurance policies Calvin didn't remember signing, totaling $5 million. Medical records showing his declining health metrics. Communication between Christie and Marshall planning to stage Calvin's death as natural causes due to undiagnosed illness. A timeline. Calvin was supposed to be dead within 6 weeks, but Christie had died first. Calvin read through everything twice, making notes on paper because he didn't trust digital records. The scheme was sophisticated. Christie and Marshall had been running it for at least 5 years. They'd extracted over $800,000 from their victims. They had dirt on a dozen prominent men in Connecticut and Massachusetts, and they planned to murder Calvin for his money. One message from Marshall to Christie, dated 2 months ago, made Calvin's blood run cold. Your husband is too trusting. Almost boring. I hate that you have to fuck him to maintain cover. Once he's dead and we have his money, we're disappearing to Costa Rica. New identities, beach house, the life we planned. Just a few more months of playing the devoted wife. Christie's response, playing devoted is exhausting, but his architecture firm is worth waiting for. He's signing over partnership rights to Richard Clayton next month in case anything happens to him. Richard's already in our pocket. We'll control everything. Richard, Calvin's business partner of 15 years. The man he trusted to run Rasmussen and Clayton Design if anything happened to him. Calvin's grief transformed into something harder, colder. He'd been mourning a woman who never existed. The Christie he loved was a fiction, a performance, a long con. The real Christie was a monster who'd spent years planning to kill him. And she wasn't working alone. He spent the next several hours copying every file from the laptop onto 3 separate external drives. He documented everything in a detailed notebook. Then he began researching his enemies. Marshall Jones, 34 years old, personal trainer at an upscale gym in Hartford. No criminal record. Drove an expensive car despite his modest job. Rented a luxury apartment in the city. On social media, he posted motivational quotes and workout videos. He looked like 1,000 other Instagram fitness influencers. Vapid, vain, and seemingly harmless. Stacey Kane, Christie's best friend, appeared in several photos with Marshall and Christie. Messages revealed she was the recruiter. She identified wealthy, vulnerable men at the yoga studio and social events. She'd introduced Christie to Calvin at that conference in Boston. Their meeting wasn't fate. It was a setup. Richard Clayton, Calvin's business partner, had been funneling company money into shell accounts. The evidence was right there in the laptop files. Richard wasn't just complicit. He was an active participant. There were others. A network of enablers, accomplices, and conspirators. All of them profiting from pain. Calvin should have gone to the police. He knew that. This was evidence of attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy. Any rational person would call the authorities. But Calvin wasn't feeling rational. He was feeling something he'd never experienced before, a cold, calculating rage that demanded more than legal justice. These people had tried to kill him. They'd stolen years of his life. They'd murdered his ability to trust. They'd turned his marriage into a crime scene. The police would arrest them. Lawyers would get them deals. They might serve a few years. Then they'd be free, probably still wealthy from their other schemes, probably doing it all again to someone else. That wasn't enough. Chapter 3. Building the Arsenal. Calvin spent 3 days locked in his home office, subsisting on coffee and protein bars. He told Clayton and his secretary he had the flu. He ignored calls from Stacey Kane asking how he was coping. He ignored emails from Richard about company business. Instead, he became an investigator. First, he secured his own health. A private doctor visit, not his usual physician, someone in the next county, confirmed what he suspected: toxic levels of thallium in his blood. Chronic poisoning. The doctor wanted to hospitalize him immediately. How long has this been happening? Dr. Emily Santos asked, concern etched on her face. 18 months, maybe longer. Mr. Rasmussen, you should be dead. Another month and you would be. We need to start chelation therapy immediately. Can you do it privately? No medical records that could be subpoenaed. Dr. Santos studied him. This is intentional poisoning, isn't it? You need to go to the police. I will. But first, I need to get healthy enough to see this through. Can you help me or not? She could. For a substantial cash payment. She agreed to treat him quietly. The chelation therapy would take weeks, but he'd start feeling better within days. Next, Calvin needed intelligence and expertise. He called Arthur Byers, a private investigator Clayton had used for corporate due diligence. They met at a diner 40 miles from Calvin's town. Arthur was in his 50s, weathered and cynical, with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen humanity's worst. Calvin showed him everything: the laptop, the files, the evidence of a conspiracy. Jesus Christ, Arthur muttered, scrolling through the documents. Your wife was a professional. This is organized crime level sophistication. Can you find out everything about Marshall Jones, Stacey Kane, and Richard Clayton? I need to know their lives, their habits, their vulnerabilities, their secrets. Everything. Planning to sue them, planning to destroy them. Arthur raised an eyebrow. I'm licensed. I can't be part of anything illegal. You're gathering information. What I do with it is my business. Fair enough. This kind of deep dive costs money. Calvin slid an envelope across the table. $10,000 in cash. First installment. Give me everything. Over the next week, as chelation therapy purged the poison from Calvin's system, Arthur delivered results. The investigator was thorough and ruthless. Marshall Jones lived beyond his means because Christie had been funding him. But before Christie died, he'd been having money troubles, gambling debts, specifically. He owed $75,000 to a bookie named Julio Wilcox, who was connected to some very unpleasant people in Boston. Marshall had been pressing Christie to accelerate Calvin's death so they could pay off the debt and disappear. Stacy Kane was married to a successful cardiac surgeon, Patrick Lamb, who had no idea his wife was part of a criminal enterprise. Stacy had her own victims, 3 men she'd personally blackmailed using the same playbook as Christie. She'd made over $200,000 in the past 3 years. Richard Clayton was drowning. His gambling addiction was worse than Marshall's. He'd embezzled nearly $400,000 from Rasmussen and Clayton Design to pay off debts. Christie and Marshall had discovered his theft and blackmailed him into cooperation. Richard's plan was to disappear to Mexico once Calvin was dead and the company sold. "They're all desperate," Arthur said, spreading photographs and financial records across Calvin's desk. "Desperate people make mistakes. Or they're dangerous," Calvin replied. "That too. What's your play here?" Calvin had been thinking about nothing else. He couldn't just kill them. He wasn't a murderer, despite what they tried to do to him. But he could engineer their complete destruction using the law, social consequences, and their own greed against them. "I'm going to give them what they want," Calvin said slowly. "Or what they think they want." He outlined his plan to Arthur. The investigator listened, occasionally nodding, sometimes grinning. "It's risky," Arthur said when Calvin finished. "If any part of this goes wrong, you're exposed. It won't go wrong, because I'm going to do what they never expected." "What's that?" "I'm going to be smarter than them, and I'm going to make them destroy each other." The first move was subtle. Calvin called a meeting with Richard at the office. He looked thinner, paler. The poison's lingering effects actually helped sell his performance. "Richard, I need to talk about succession planning," Calvin said. "With Christie gone, I'm realizing I have no safety net. If something happened to me..." Richard leaned forward, trying to hide his eagerness. "Of course, Cal. What are you thinking? I want to formalize your partnership rights. Maybe set up a transfer arrangement. My lawyer says I should have clear documentation." That's really thoughtful of you." Richard's eyes glittered. "You look tired. Are you feeling okay?" "Honestly, no. I've been sick for months. The doctors keep finding things. I'm worried I have something serious." "Jesus, Cal. That's terrible. Look, whatever you need, I'm here. For the company, for you personally. We're partners. We're family." Calvin wanted to reach across the desk and smash Richard's lying face. Instead, he smiled weakly. "Thanks, Richard. That means a lot. Let me work with my attorney, and I'll have something drawn up." Richard practically floated out of the office. Calvin's phone buzzed. A text from Stacy Kane. "Hi, Calvin. Just checking in. I'm making dinner tonight. Why don't you come over? You shouldn't be alone so much. Patrick would love to see you too." He texted back, "Thanks, Stacy. I'll try to make it." That evening, Calvin drove to a storage facility he'd rented under a false name. Inside the unit, he'd assembled his war room. Copies of all the evidence, backup drives, burner phones, a new laptop, and a go bag with cash, documents, and supplies in case he needed to disappear quickly. On a whiteboard, he'd mapped out the connections between all the players. Christie was dead, but her conspiracy lived on. Marshall, Stacy, and Richard didn't know Calvin had discovered everything. They thought he was a grieving, sick, trusting mark waiting to be finished off. Their mistake. Calvin's phone rang. Clayton Vargas. "Hey man, you've been ghost," Clayton said. "I'm worried about you." "I'm okay. Just processing everything. Want to grab a beer? I've got something I need to run by you anyway." Business stuff. They met at their usual bar, a dive near Clayton's office. Over whiskey, Clayton said, "I've been doing some financial auditing for my company. Found some irregularities. Made me paranoid, so I ran some checks on our personal accounts too." "Cal, when's the last time you looked at your investment portfolio?" "I don't know. Few months?" Christie usually handled that stuff. Clayton pulled out his tablet. "I did some digging. Don't be mad, but there's money missing from your accounts. A lot of money. Transfers to shell companies. It's been happening for over a year. Calvin pretended to be shocked. What? How much? At least $500,000. Maybe more. Cal, I think Christy might have been stealing from me? Calvin's voice was hollow. No, there's got to be an explanation. I'm sorry, man, but you need to look into this. If she was embezzling, you might be liable for taxes, penalties. Christy wouldn't do that. She loved me. Clayton gripped his shoulder. I know this is hard, but you need to protect yourself. Get a forensic accountant. Check everything. Calvin nodded slowly, letting doubt and confusion play across his face. Okay, yeah, I'll look into it. Inside, he was smiling. Clayton's discovery was perfect. It gave Calvin a reason to start asking questions, to investigate, to appear victimized. It was cover for what was coming next. He had the evidence. He had the intelligence. He had the plan. Now, he just needed to set the trap. Chapter 4, Parallel Lives. Marshall Jones was getting nervous. Christy had been dead for 2 weeks, and the situation was deteriorating. He sat in his apartment, curtains drawn, reviewing the burner phone messages that couldn't be traced. His phone buzzed. Stacy Kane. We need to meet, her text said. Coffee tomorrow. Usual place. They met at a Starbucks halfway between Hartford and her suburban home. Stacy wore oversized sunglasses despite the overcast sky. Paranoia was setting in. Calvin knows something, she said without preamble. I can feel it. He's been different. Distant. He's grieving, Marshall replied, but even he didn't sound convinced. His wife just died. You don't understand. I've known Calvin for years, ever since I introduced him to Christy. He's usually so open, so trusting. Now he's closed off. He declined my dinner invitation. That's not normal. Marshall stirred his coffee nervously. Did Christy tell you exactly what was on that laptop? Everything. The videos, the recordings, the whole operation. Marshall, if he finds that laptop, he won't. The office is locked. Even if he goes in, he won't know her password. We don't know that. Christy was confident, maybe too confident. We need to get that laptop. How? We can't just break into his house. Stacy removed her sunglasses, and Marshall saw genuine fear in her eyes. Do you know what's on there? Not just Calvin's stuff. Everything. All our other targets. My involvement. Richard's embezzlement. If that gets to the police, then we make sure it doesn't. They formulated a plan. Stacy would get close to Calvin again, convincing him she was a concerned friend. She'd look for an opportunity to access Christy's office. Meanwhile, Marshall would reach out to Calvin directly, claiming Christy had borrowed money for a business investment and he needed to discuss repayment. What they didn't know was that Calvin was 3 steps ahead. That afternoon, Calvin met with a woman named Hannah Mann at a discreet law office in Boston. Hannah was a prosecutor friend of Arthur Byers, someone who could be trusted with sensitive information. This is the most comprehensive evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder I've ever seen, Hannah said, reviewing the files. We could arrest everyone involved tomorrow. But Calvin sensed her hesitation. But some of this evidence was obtained through your wife's illegal activities. Defense attorneys will argue it's fruit of the poisonous tree. We might get convictions on the fraud and conspiracy, but the attempted murder charge could be tricky. Marshall and Stacy could argue they never acted on any murder plan, that it was just talk. So they might walk. They'd serve time for the fraud. Maybe 5 years, less with good behavior. But murder? That's harder to prove when the victim is still alive and the primary perpetrator is dead. Calvin had expected this. Legal justice was limited. That's why he needed something more comprehensive. What if I got them to act again? He asked. What if I gave them an opportunity to finish what Christy started, and we caught them in the act? Hannah's eyes widened. You want to use yourself as bait? Calvin, that's incredibly dangerous. I'm already dead in their minds. I'm just waiting for the toxins to finish the job. What if we let them think they still have a chance? Over the next hour, they worked out the parameters. Hannah would coordinate with state police, set up surveillance, prepare arrest warrants. But they need solid evidence of active conspiracy and attempted murder, not just historical planning. Calvin would provide it. The next day, Marshall called. Mr. Rasmussen, this is Marshall Jones. I'm not sure if Christy mentioned me, but I was her personal trainer. I'm so sorry for your loss. Calvin feigned confusion. Oh, yes, she mentioned you. Thank you. I hate to bring this up at such a difficult time, but Christy had invested in a business venture of mine. $30,000. She said it was from your joint account. I'm trying to wrap up the finances, and I wanted to check with you about the repayment schedule. $30,000 Christy had stolen. Marshall was trying to legitimize the theft. I don't know anything about that, Calvin said carefully. Christy handled our investments. Can you send me documentation? Of course. I'll email everything. And Mr. Rasmussen? Again, I'm so sorry. Christy was amazing. The world lost a light. Calvin wanted to vomit. Instead, he said, thank you. Yes, she was special. After hanging up, he texted Arthur. Marshall made contact. He's testing the waters. Arthur's response, good. The fish is approaching the hook. That evening, Stacy showed up at Calvin's door with a casserole. I know you said you were busy, but I couldn't let you starve. Can I come in for just a minute? Calvin let her inside, watching as her eyes darted around the house, clearly looking for something. How are you really doing? She asked, setting the casserole on the kitchen counter. You look thin. Are you eating? Not much appetite. Calvin, I'm worried about you. You're isolating yourself. It's not healthy. She touched his arm, and he had to suppress the urge to recoil. Christy will want you to take care of yourself. She loved you so much. Did she? The words came out before he could stop them. Stacy's expression flickered. Surprise, calculation, concern. Of course she did. Why would you ask that? I've been going through her things. Found some financial irregularities. It's probably nothing, but what kind of irregularities? Calvin shrugged. Missing money. Accounts I didn't know about. My friend Clayton found them when he was helping me sort through everything. I'm sure there's an explanation. I'm sure there is, Stacy agreed quickly. Too quickly. Christy was so organized. There's probably paperwork somewhere explaining everything. Yeah, maybe in her office. I still haven't gone through it thoroughly. Kept the door locked, you know? Feels wrong to invade her privacy, even now. Stacy's interest sharpened. Sometimes the hardest thing is the thing we need to do most. Maybe I could help. Go through her office with you? It might be easier with support. That's kind of you. I'll think about it. After she left, Calvin reviewed the hidden camera footage from his kitchen. Arthur had installed them throughout the house. Legal, since it was Calvin's property. On the recording, he watched Stacy pause by the hallway leading to Christy's office, clearly wanting to explore, but not daring while he was there. She's desperate, he told Arthur on the phone. They all are. The question is, how desperate? Desperate enough to try again. That night, Calvin implemented phase 2. He called Richard and asked to meet for dinner. At an upscale steakhouse, Calvin ordered expensive wine and looked wan and tired. Richard, I need advice, he said. I've been thinking about my health. The doctors can't figure out what's wrong with me. I'm getting worse, not better. What are they saying? Possible liver disease. Maybe kidney failure. They want to do more tests, but I'm exhausted. And with Christy gone, I'm realizing I have no energy for the company anymore. I'm thinking of selling. Richard nearly choked on a steak. Selling? Cal, you built this company. You can't just. I don't have a choice. I'm sick. I need to focus on getting well. And if something happens to me, I want to make sure you're taken care of. You've been a loyal partner. I appreciate that, but I've talked to some acquisition firms. We could get $12 million for Rasmussen and Clayton. Your share would be $6 million, minus some debt the company's carrying. You'd walk away with at least $4 million after taxes. That's not bad for 15 years of work. Richard's eyes glazed with greed. For $1 million plus the money he'd already stolen. He could disappear, start over, pay off all his debts. When would this happen? Richard asked. Soon. I'm meeting with a firm next week. They're very interested. I just need you to sign off on some financial disclosures. Standard due diligence stuff. Of course. Whatever you need. Calvin studied his partner. This man he'd trusted, who'd betrayed him, who was already calculating how to maximize his theft. Richard, I want you to know, you've been like a brother to me. Even with everything going on, I'm glad I have you. Richard looked almost ashamed. Almost. You too, Cal. You too. Chapter 5. The Pressure Builds. Arthur's investigation expanded into territories Calvin hadn't anticipated. The private investigator discovered that Christie and Marshall's operation was larger than initially thought. They had victims across 3 states. Some had paid tens of thousands to keep secrets buried. Others had been bankrupted. One victim stood out. Gary Wiggins, a doctor from Massachusetts who'd lost his medical practice after Christie and Marshall had blackmailed him over prescription fraud. Gary had paid them $150,000 before finally refusing to continue. In retaliation, Christie had anonymously reported him to the medical board, destroying his career. Calvin tracked Gary down to a small apartment in Worcester. The man who answered the door looked 20 years older than his age. His eyes were hollow. His hands shook slightly, signs of someone broken by trauma. "Dr. Wiggins? My name is Calvin Rasmussen. I need to talk to you about Christy Meadows." Gary's face went white. "I have nothing to say about her. She's dead. Heart attack, 2 weeks ago." For a long moment, Gary just stared. Then tears welled in his eyes. "Good. I know it's a terrible thing to say, but good." Calvin spent 2 hours hearing Gary's story. It was brutally similar to his own. The targeting, the manipulation, the systematic exploitation. Gary had lost everything. His practice, his reputation, his marriage, his savings. "I wanted to kill her," Gary admitted. "I fantasized about it constantly, but I couldn't. I'm not that person, so I just survived. Barely. What if I told you there's a way to get justice?" Calvin asked. "Not just for you, but for everyone she hurt." Gary looked up with desperate hope. "Ow, help me finish what I'm building. I have evidence of everything, but I need victims willing to testify to show the pattern of behavior. Your story matters. You're going after them, her partners, all of them, and I'm going to make sure they can't hurt anyone else." Gary agreed. Over the next week, Arthur and Calvin found 3 more victims willing to come forward. Each had a story of devastation. Together, they represented millions in damages and years of suffering. But gathering victims was only one piece. Calvin needed to make the conspirators panic, to force them into mistakes. He started with Stacy. Calvin called her and said, "I'm cleaning out Christie's office this weekend. Would you still be willing to help? I could use the emotional support." "Of course," Stacy replied immediately. Saturday works." When Saturday came, Calvin had prepared meticulously. Arthur had installed additional cameras. Hanneman had state police standing by at a nearby location. Everything was recorded and monitored. Stacy arrived with coffee and sympathy. "This must be so hard," she said as they stood outside the locked office. Calvin opened the door. The room was exactly as he'd found it. Bare, clinical, just a desk and laptop. "Wow," Stacy said, unable to hide her surprise. "This is sparse." "Yeah, I expected file cabinets, photos, something personal. But there's just this." He gestured to the laptop. "I haven't even opened it. Feels too intrusive. Maybe we should? There might be important documents." "Estate stuff." Calvin pretended to hesitate, then opened the laptop. The screen came to life, showing the desktop with the insurance folder prominently displayed. Stacy's body language changed immediately. She became tense, alert. "What's that folder?" "I don't know. Should I look?" "Maybe we should wait. Get a lawyer or something. It's my wife's computer. I'm the executor. I should know what's on it." As Calvin moved the cursor toward the folder, Stacy grabbed his wrist. "Wait, Calvin, I think there might be things on here you don't want to see." "What do you mean?" Stacy's mask slipped. "Christy was my friend, but she had secrets. Maybe it's better to remember her as she was." "What kind of secrets?" Calvin pulled his hand away. "Stacy, if you know something, I don't know anything specific. Just that Christy could be private, compartmentalized. Some things might be shocking if you're not prepared. Why are you so worried about what's on my dead wife's computer?" The air in the room became charged with tension. Stacy's eyes darted to the laptop, calculating. "I'm not worried. I'm protecting you. As a friend. By stopping me from opening a folder on my own property." "Calvin." He opened the folder. The subfolders appeared. Names of men, including his own. Calvin clicked on Marshall Jones's folder, pretending he'd chosen randomly. Videos appeared. Thumbnails showing Marshall and Christy together, intimate, conspiratorial. Calvin clicked one, and the footage began playing. Them in bed, planning, laughing about their victims. Stacy lunged for the laptop. Don't watch that. You don't understand. Calvin caught her wrist. What don't I understand, Stacy? That my wife was a criminal? That she was cheating on me? That she was running blackmail schemes? His voice was cold, controlled. Or did you think I didn't know you were helping her? Stacy's face crumbled. Calvin, please. Get out of my house. You don't understand what happened. It wasn't supposed to. Get out. Stacy fled. Calvin watched her go, then checked the cameras. Everything was recorded. Her panic, her admission that Christy had secrets, her attempt to stop him from viewing the evidence. It wasn't a confession, but it was close. He called Arthur. Phase 1 complete. She's scared. Now she'll contact Marshall. And Marshall will contact Richard, Arthur confirmed. The dominoes are falling. Within an hour, Calvin's burner phone picked up encrypted communications between the three conspirators. Arthur had hacked their phones weeks ago. Illegal, but Calvin wasn't planning to use in court. He just needed to know their moves. Marshall's voice. He found the laptop. He's seen everything. Stacy, panicking. What do we do? If he goes to the police? Richard, we need to contain this. Permanently. What are you suggesting? Marshall asked. He's sick. He's weak. An accident wouldn't be hard to arrange. A break-in gone wrong. Something. There it was. The conspiracy continuing, evolving from the original plot. They were discussing murdering him right now, actively. Calvin forwarded the recording to Hannah Man with a text. They're still trying to kill me. We have them. Her response, not quite yet. They're discussing it, but we need them to act. One more push. Chapter 6, the final lure. Calvin knew the next phase was the most dangerous. He had to make himself vulnerable enough to draw them into action, but not so vulnerable that they'd actually succeed in killing him. He started by getting sicker, or appearing to. Dr. Santos helped him simulate symptoms using harmless but dramatic-looking interventions. She wrote a false medical report documenting severe liver failure and gave him a medication that temporarily made him look jaundiced and weak. Calvin scheduled a meeting with Richard and handed him the medical report. It's worse than I thought. 6 months, maybe less. I need to get the company sold immediately. Richard read the report, and Calvin saw the calculation in his eyes. 6 months meant Richard might not need to do anything. Nature would handle it. But 6 months also meant risk, potential investigations, time for things to go wrong. Jesus, Cal. I'm so sorry. The acquisition firm is ready to move forward. They need final financials from you by Friday. Can you handle that? Of course. What Richard didn't know was that the acquisition firm was a shell company Arthur had created. The financial disclosures would reveal all of Richard's embezzlement. He'd have to choose between exposing himself or walking away from the deal, and the $4 million Calvin had dangled. Simultaneously, Calvin reached out to Marshall about the supposed investment Christy had made. They met at a coffee shop. Marshall was younger than he'd looked in the videos, with that artificial confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. Thanks for meeting me, Mr. Rasmussen. I know this is awkward timing. Call me Calvin. And yeah, it's fine. I found some records of the investment. $30,000, like you said. Marshall relaxed slightly. Right. The business didn't pan out like we hoped. I'm prepared to return the principal in installments. I don't want the money. Marshall blinked. What? Christy believed in you. That means something. Keep the money. Invest it in your next venture. Consider it a memorial to her. This clearly wasn't what Marshall expected. That's very generous. Are you sure? I am. But I wonder if you could do something for me in return. Of course. Anything. Calvin leaned forward, lowering his voice. I'm dying. Liver failure. I have maybe 6 months. In that time, I want to experience things I've been too cautious to try. Christy always said you knew how to live fully, take risks. I want to hire you as a personal trainer, a life coach maybe. Help me make my last months count. Marshall's mind was clearly racing. Having daily access to Calvin, gaining his trust, being paid to spend time with him. It was an opportunity to finish the plan without suspicion. I'd be honored, Marshall said. Christy talked about you a lot. She want me to help you. Great. We start tomorrow. My house, 6 a.m. I want to get in shape, get strong, make every day count. They shook hands, and Calvin saw the predator behind Marshall's smile. Over the next week, Calvin played his role perfectly. He let Marshall into his home, into his routine. They trained in Calvin's home gym. Marshall made him protein shakes. Calvin secretly disposed of them, maintaining the pretense of drinking them while Marshall watched. "You're doing great," Marshall encouraged during a workout. "For someone dealing with illness, your strength is impressive." "I'm fighting, not ready to give up yet." Christy would be proud. Calvin paused mid-rep. "Did you know her well?" "Just as a client. But she talked about you sometimes. Said you were a good man. Too good for this world." The audacity of the lie was stunning. She said that. All the time. Meanwhile, Arthur's team monitored everything. They captured Marshall examining Calvin's medicine cabinet, searching his home office when he thought Calvin was in the shower, taking photos of financial documents. The trap was nearly complete. But Calvin needed one more piece, getting them all in the same place, making them act together. He called a meeting of the conspirators, disguised as innocent gatherings. First, he invited Richard and Marshall to dinner, mentioning he wanted them to meet. "Richard's my business partner. Marshall's helping me stay healthy. You two should know each other in case something happens to me." Richard looked uncomfortable, but Marshall played it smooth. At dinner, Calvin watched them communicate in subtle glances and careful words, coordinating without speaking directly. Then he invited Stacy to lunch, along with her husband Patrick. "Stacy's been such a good friend. Patrick, I know you're a cardiac surgeon. I wanted to ask your professional opinion about my condition." Patrick Lamb was in his 60s, distinguished and seemingly kind. He had no idea his wife was a criminal. Over lunch, Calvin described his symptoms, watching Stacy squirm as Patrick offered medical advice that contradicted the false narrative. "Your symptoms don't really align with liver failure," Patrick said thoughtfully. "Have you been tested for heavy metal poisoning? Thallium exposure can mimic liver disease and has similar symptoms to what you're describing." Stacy nearly choked on her wine. "Patrick, I'm sure Calvin's doctors know what they're doing. I'm just saying it might be worth checking. Thallium poisoning is rare but serious. If caught early, it's treatable." Calvin pretended to consider this. "That's interesting. I'll ask my doctor about it." After lunch, Calvin's burner phone intercepted Stacy's panicked message to Marshall. Patrick suggested testing for thallium. "If Calvin gets tested and they find it, they'll know it was murder." "We're out of time." Marshall's response. "Then we move now. Tonight." Hannah Mann received Calvin's alert. "They're coming tonight. Everyone in position. State police ready. Cameras rolling. Be careful, Calvin." Calvin went home and prepared. The house was wired with cameras and recording devices. Plainclothes officers were positioned outside in unmarked cars. Calvin had a panic button in his pocket and a small recording device pinned inside his shirt. At 10 p.m., his doorbell rang. Chapter 7. The Confrontation. Calvin checked the camera feed. Marshall and Stacy stood at his door. He took a breath, pressed record on the backup device in his pocket, and opened the door. "Hey guys, kind of late for a visit. We need to talk," Marshall said. His friendly trainer demeanor was gone. Inside, they pushed past him. Stacy looked terrified. Marshall looked determined. Calvin left the door slightly ajar, a signal to the officers outside. "What's this about?" "We know," Stacy said. "We know you've been digging into Christie's past, that you found things." "What things?" Marshall stepped closer. "Don't play dumb. The laptop, the files. You've known for weeks." Calvin held his ground. "You're right. I know everything. The blackmail, the poisoning, all of it. I know you were planning to kill me and steal everything I've built." "We're planning." Marshall laughed bitterly. "Our planning, Calvin. Present tense." Stacy grabbed Marshall's arm. "We don't have to do this. Calvin, please. We can work something out. The money we took, we'll return it. All of it. Just don't go to the police." "Why would I agree to that?" "Because if you don't, things get worse for you," Marshall said. He pulled out a gun, not pointing it at Calvin yet, just holding it. "Christy had plans. We have plans. You're a loose end." Calvin's heart hammered, but he kept his voice steady. Every word was being recorded. "So, are you going to kill me? Right now? In my own home? It'll look like a burglary gone wrong," Marshall explained, almost casual about it. "You've been sick week. An intruder broke in. You confronted them. Tragic. And Richard? Is he part of this too? Stacy and Marshall exchanged glances. Richard doesn't know we're here, Stacy admitted. He thinks we're just going to scare you, convince you to keep quiet. But you decided murder was better? You forced this, Stacy shouted. If you just stayed ignorant, if you just died from the poison like you were supposed to, none of this would be necessary. The admission was clear, recorded. Calvin pressed his luck. Tell me something. Did Christy ever actually love me? Or was it always the long con? Marshall laughed. She loved your money. She loved your gullibility. You were the perfect mark, successful, lonely, trusting. When Stacy told us about you, Christy saw a retirement plan. How many others were there? How many people did you destroy? Does it matter? Marshall raised the gun properly now, pointing at Calvin. You're the last one. After tonight, we disappear. Costa Rica, new identities, beach life. The plan goes on, just without Christy. You really think you'll get away with this? The front door burst open. Police. Drop the weapon. 4 state troopers flooded in, guns drawn. Marshall spun toward them, and for a terrifying second, Calvin thought he might fire. But Stacy screamed, "Don't shoot," and Marshall dropped the gun. They were on the ground in seconds, cuffed, reading their rights. Hannah Mann entered behind the officers. "Mr. Rasmussen, are you all right?" "I'm fine. We got everything. The confession, the threats, the weapon." Marshall Jones, Stacy Kane, you're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, extortion, fraud. Wait, Stacy sobbed. You don't understand. It was Christy's idea. We were just saving it for your lawyer, Hannah advised coldly. As they were let out, Marshall locked eyes with Calvin. You played us. No, Calvin replied. I just stopped playing. But the night wasn't over. Chapter 8, Unraveling. Within hours, Richard Clayton turned himself in. The acquisition firm had exposed his embezzlement, and with Marshall and Stacy arrested, he knew the walls were closing in. In exchange for cooperation, Richard provided testimony about the entire conspiracy, including evidence Calvin didn't yet have about other victims and crimes. There are at least 15 other men who were blackmailed, Richard told investigators. Some paid hundreds of thousands. Christy kept detailed records because she was paranoid about Marshall double-crossing her. It's all on backup drives she kept in a safety deposit box. With Richard's cooperation, police obtained warrants and uncovered a network of crime spanning 5 years. More victims came forward. The story exploded in local media. Suburban housewife's secret life as criminal mastermind. Calvin watched the news from his living room, Arthur beside him. You did it, Arthur said. They're going away for decades. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does. But it's justice. Calvin's phone rang. An unknown number. He answered cautiously. Mr. Rasmussen? This is Patrick Lamb, Stacy's husband. Calvin had wondered when this call would come. Dr. Lamb, I'm sorry you're going through this. I had no idea. 20 years of marriage, and I had no idea who she was. Patrick's voice was hollow. She used me. My reputation, my connections, my trust. To find victims, to maintain her cover. I helped her hurt people without knowing it. You're not responsible for her choices. Legally, maybe not. But morally? I should have seen something. I'm a doctor. I'm trained to observe, to notice symptoms. But I was blind. They talked for an hour. Patrick was another victim, in his own way. By the end of the call, Patrick had agreed to testify as well, adding weight to the prosecution. The next day, Calvin met with all the victims, Gary Wiggins and 6 others who'd come forward. They gathered a lawyer's office to discuss the civil suit Arthur had proposed. We can sue the estates and assets, Arthur explained. Marshall and Stacy have some money hidden. Christy's life insurance policy, which she took out on herself before dying, can be contested. We might recover 30 to 40% of what was stolen. That's not enough, said one victim, a man named Earl Lawson who'd lost his business. They destroyed lives. It's what's possible through legal channels, Arthur replied. Calvin had been quiet through the meeting, but now he spoke. There's more we can do. Not legal, but effective. We can destroy their reputations, their families' legacies, everything they cared about that the law can't touch. Is Julio still operating? As far as I know. The police arrested Marshall and Stacy, but Julio's probably still out there, looking for his cut of whatever Marshall was planning. This was a problem. If Julio knew Marshall and Stacy were arrested, he'd know his money was gone. He might come after Calvin for revenge or compensation. Calvin called Hanneman. We have another player. Marshall's brother runs an illegal gambling operation. He might be a threat. We'll look into it, Hannah promised. But Calvin, this is police work now. You've done your part. Don't go chasing more danger. But danger came looking for Calvin. 3 days later, his car was run off the road by a black SUV. Calvin survived with bruises and a concussion, but the message was clear. Julio wanted a conversation. Chapter 9, Final Justice. Calvin refused protection. This enraged Clayton, Arthur, and Hannah, but Calvin was adamant. If Julio Wilcox wants to talk, let's talk. But on my terms. Arthur sighed. You have a death wish. I have a life wish. I want to finish this completely. No loose ends, no threats hanging over me forever. Calvin reached out through channels Arthur provided. A meet was arranged at a warehouse in an industrial area outside Hartford. Calvin wore a wire. Police snipers positioned on surrounding buildings. But he walked in alone. Julio Wilcox was older than Marshall, harder, with prison tattoos and dead eyes. 2 heavies flanked him. You're the architect, Julio said. The one who got my brother arrested. Your brother tried to kill me. Multiple times. Family is family. He owed me 75 grand. That's your debt now. Calvin laughed. That's not how this works. No. Julio pulled out a gun. How does it work then? It works like this. Your brother is going to prison for 25 years minimum. You can join him, or you can walk away. You think you scare me? I think you're smart enough to know when you're beat. I have recordings of Marshall discussing your gambling operation, the connection to the blackmail scheme. I have financial records showing money laundering. I have testimony from victims about how the system worked. I can make you disappear into a federal prison, or I can let the DA focus on the main conspirators and forget about the gambling angle. Julio's jaw clenched. You're blackmailing me? With what my brother did. I'm offering you a choice. Walk away, shut down your operation, disappear from Connecticut, and I forget you exist. Or push this, and I bury you. The tension in the warehouse was suffocating. Julio's men looked ready to act. Calvin wondered if he'd pushed too hard, if his plan would end with a bullet. Then Julio laughed. You got balls, I'll give you that. Marshall said you were soft. Clearly he was wrong. Do we have a deal? Julio holstered his weapon. You got 2 weeks. Then I'm gone. But if I ever see you again, if our paths ever cross, this conversation didn't happen and you're just another mark. Understood. Understood. Julio and his men left. Calvin sagged against a crate, adrenaline crash hitting him hard. Police poured in seconds later. That was insane, Hannah said. Brave but insane. It's over, Calvin replied. It's actually over. He outlined a plan. They would use their collective resources to ensure the story stayed in the public eye. They'd write books, give interviews, create a documentary. They'd make sure the names Marshall Jones, Stacy Kane, Christy Meadows, and Richard Clayton became synonymous with betrayal and evil. They took our money, Calvin said. Let's take their legacy. The victims agreed. But as the meeting broke up, Gary pulled Calvin aside. There's something else you should know. I did some digging after Christy destroyed my practice. Found connections I didn't understand at the time. Marshall has a brother, Julio Wilcox, the bookie he owed money to. They're related. Different last names because of family split, but they were working together. Calvin's blood ran cold. Working together, how? Julio would identify vulnerable gamblers with money. He'd purposely extend them credit, get them desperate. Then Marshall and Christy would offer them a way out through illegal means that left them open to blackmail. It was a feeder system. 6 months later, the trials were brutal but successful. Marshall Jones and Stacy Kane were convicted on all counts. Attempted murder, conspiracy, extortion, fraud. Marshall got 30 years. Stacy got 25. Richard Clayton cooperated fully and received 8 years with possibility of parole after 5. The civil suits recovered $1.2 million from hidden accounts and assets. Calvin distributed it among the victims proportionally. He kept nothing for himself beyond his own stolen funds. Patrick Lamb divorced Stacy and dedicated himself to victim advocacy work, using his medical expertise to help people recognize signs of manipulation and coercion. Gary Wiggins used his settlement money to open a free clinic, serving people who couldn't afford health care. Christy's mother, Margaret Hoffman, reached out to Calvin. They met at a quiet restaurant. "I need to apologize," Margaret said, tears in her eyes. "I raised her. I should have seen the monster she became. You're not responsible for her choices. I knew she was ambitious, maybe ruthless, but I convinced myself it was just drive, determination. I ignored warning signs because she was my daughter." Calvin had forgiven Margaret in his heart weeks ago. Carrying hate was exhausting. She fooled everyone. That was her skill. "What will you do now?" "Live. Actual living. Not the performance I did for 12 years. Calvin rebuilt his life brick by brick. He sold his partnership in the architecture firm, taking a fair settlement. He started a new, smaller practice focused on designing community centers and low-income housing. The profit margins were smaller, but the purpose was larger. He dated cautiously, openly, honestly. He told potential partners everything up front. "I was married to a sociopath who tried to kill me. I have trust issues and baggage, but I'm working on it." Most people ran. Some stayed. One woman, a therapist named Kay Moore, understood. They took things slowly, building something real on a foundation of truth rather than lies. Clayton remained his best friend, checking in weekly. Arthur became a regular dinner companion, sharing war stories and cynical wisdom. Calvin attended support groups for victims of intimate partner abuse. His story helped others recognize they weren't alone, weren't weak, weren't at fault. On the first anniversary of Christy's death, Calvin visited her grave, not to mourn, but to acknowledge the ending. "You wanted to kill me and steal my life," he said to the headstone. "Instead, you gave me a better one. I'm stronger now, smarter. I know who I am in ways I never did before. You thought you could destroy me, but you just burned away everything that wasn't essential. Thank you for that, in the most twisted way possible." He left flowers, not because she deserved them, but because the gesture was for him, not her. A symbol of letting go. Walking back to his car, Calvin's phone rang. "Kay, hey, you okay?" she asked. "Yeah, I'm good. Actually good. Want to grab dinner? Real dinner, not just takeout at my place." "I'd love that." As Calvin drove away from the cemetery, he caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. The man staring back was different from the one who'd unlocked that office door a year ago. Harder in some ways, softer in others. Wounded, but healing. He'd lost his wife, his savings, his naivete, his easy trust. But he'd gained something invaluable, himself. The locked room had revealed his wife's secrets. But in seeking justice, Calvin had discovered his own strength, his own capacity for strategic thinking, his own resilience. Christy and her conspirators had tried to make him a victim. Instead, they'd made him whole.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.